Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second Lunch and Learn session. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marla Goldsmith, and I'm the Registry Manager of USIDNET. I'm here with Julie Magnuson, our Research Program Coordinator, and Tara Calder, our Project Director. We, along with the steering committee, have been working very hard on this new system, and we're excited to share it with you. So, by now, you should have all received an email prompting you to create a password in the new system. Some of our users experienced technical difficulties with the email, so if you were unable to create a password, please email me and I'll have the system send you a new password reset. So during this session, we'll be walking you through the new registry software, highlighting some new features, and answering any questions you may have. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Alrighty, so on this first screen, I would like to highlight a few things. Right now, you might see that USIDNET Registry is the only study listed under My Studies. One of the exciting new features of this software is that it has multiple site functionality. Though we aren't using this feature right now, it does open the door for potential sub-studies or trials in the future. In addition, if you click on this icon in the upper right-hand corner, among other things, you'll be able to access your account settings. Though it is certainly not required, you are able to put a profile picture on your account. Now, this is just a dummy account for the purposes of this webinar, so my profile picture is just my dog. But one of the more important things about this section is that you can update your name and you can choose a preferred date format for your dates. In addition, if you'd like to put some contact information for you or your organization, you can do so here, and this is also the location where you will be changing or updating your password. All right, so let's enter the USIDNET registry study, and you do that by clicking right here. When you click into the study, you're going to be met with this overview screen, which will show you a couple of graphs depicting your site's progress. Again, because this is a dummy site, we won't see much here for now. But the Users tab right up here is one of our new features. And what this Users tab does is it can show you all of the people that are associated with your enrolling site. And this is useful in checking up on users that may have left your institution or realizing that perhaps someone who should have access does not. So if either of these cases ever occurs, please reach out to me. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go through the enrollment process. So if you click on Subjects on the left-hand side, the first thing you'll notice is that new patients are not going to have these trailing zeros that we've all been accustomed to in the old USIDNET registry. And so that should be a fairly easy way to determine which of your patients come from the old registry and which patients come from the new registry, though none of the numbers will overlap. But for those old subjects, if you ever need to check in on things like when was the last visit date or did I put in their transplant, you can do so by clicking this link called Historical Data. There, you will be able to see some clinical data points, including their last diagnosis, the date of their last lab input, and some information about transplantation and IG therapy. But let's go ahead and add a new patient. And so you do so by clicking on this Add button in the upper right-hand corner. The information requested on the screen has not changed all that much, but you will notice that participant is de-identified has defaulted to no. You're going to see a couple of these default fields as we make our way through the registry visits, but I'll go over that in just a bit. If your participant is de-identified, you can go ahead and click Yes. Another new feature of our registry is that we now accept partial dates. So you're going to see this in a couple of different sections in the registry, and if, for example, you only want to put in the year, you only need to fill out this section, and it will still populate with our birth year. Our required fields, such as sex, have not changed, but we have added a new required field, and it's called zip code. So once we're finished filling out this form, we're going to press the Next button. Now, don't worry about changing the start date or the consent date or the family history date. Those dates aren't useful for us. Now, if you feel that any of these dates are useful for your own record keeping, by all means, feel free to do so, but it's not important for us. So we're going to hit save and exit. So on this next tab, the subject dashboard, this is the location where you will be able to see all of your patients as well as the different events that they have completed. Now, we have separated consent and family history from an actual registry visit. This is because you might not need to update those two items every time you're updating a registry visit. But please remember, consent is required before you enter any of the registry visits. So for this new patient that we just created, I'm going to fill out the consent section. The questions are fairly straightforward. At the top of each screen, you'll see either your patient name or initials, depending on the selections that you made at registration. And you're going to be prompted to answer these three questions: whether or not your patient allows USIDNET to contact them, or whether or not USIDNET can contact their physicians. Now, if your consent does not have this section, you can just press no. Finally, if your consent allows sharing with any other data platforms, go ahead and click yes. And here's where you have the opportunity to enter those recipient ID numbers. And if it's not either CIBMTR or PIDTC, you can include additional data platforms in this section. So let's save and exit. And we're going to add a registry visit. And so the way that you would add a new registry visit is you would click on this add event icon right here. So when we click add event, the only event name that you're going to see is registry visit. And then we hit save and exit. So you will see that your registry visit will now appear under your subject details. Now, before we go any further, I just want to highlight what these icons mean. So you'll see these different icons right next to every form in your registry visit. This circle means that data entry has not yet started. This folded down paper icon means that data entry has started. And when data entry is complete, you will see a checkbox, excuse me. Now, you'll notice that we've changed the structure in which we ask for visit dates. In the previous registry, we had received some feedback that the date ranges were a bit ambiguous or confusing. And so the way that we ask this question now is we want to know the visit covers up to the following date. So all the information in the visit covers up to this specific encounter date. In addition, we've changed the way that we are collecting our diagnoses. So at the beginning, we're only going to ask for phenotype, and then we're going to ask for the patient's genotype a little bit later in the event. Now, I can send you the list of these diagnoses so you can become more familiar with them. But if you're ever unsure about where your patient belongs, say you do have a gene, but you're not quite sure which diagnosis would match, you can go ahead and click this search box. And down here, you're going to be able to enter, let's say you have an ADA patient and you're not completely sure. It will link to what we feel is the most appropriate phenotype. And so at that point, you can choose the diagnosis and click save. Now, as I said, I'm only going to highlight the sections in the registry that have changed, which is why I'm going to skip right over our vitals and measures section because it hasn't changed at all. But one of the items that has changed pretty significantly is our clinical history section. From the get-go, we only ask for either date or age now. But remember, if you choose to enter the date of onset, you can still put in those partial dates here. Another thing that we've added is a couple of introductory questions. So in a couple of these sections, before you even see the fields, it will ask you, has the patient experienced infections? Has the patient experienced conditions? So if they haven't, you don't have to see all of the corresponding fields, but it's only when you press yes that you're prompted to enter additional information. Kind of following that, we've now linked a lot of our conditions to medical coding dictionaries. And you'll be able to see that with this little magnifying glass that appears underneath the field. And if you forget, so what will happen, you can go ahead and put in a condition, and the minute you click out or press enter, you're going to be met with this screen. You can choose to be as broad or as specific as you would like. It's up to you. And then the questions that we are concerned with is whether the disease was presented before or at the time of PI diagnosis, or whether this is a new finding. So basically, we want to know all the infections that led up to diagnosis and what infections are still seem to be occurring for this patient. So before we go any further, I want to show you one new feature with the registry. In order to do that, I'm going to go back to a patient that I've already created. So as you can see, I've made 2 registry visits for this patient. One of them has not been filled out, as you can see with these icons, and one of them has. So for example, in the first visit in clinical history, I've placed a number of infections with corresponding conditions. In that second visit, even though I haven't begun the form quite yet, you will notice that those same infections have pre-populated. And so this is a good way for users to know what they've already placed into the system, and then they can update whether this is still happening, this is a new finding at this visit, and you can add additional infections at that time. And we've pushed the data, so to speak, in a couple of different sections, such as IG therapy, surgeries, systemic and organ-specific conditions. So I can also send you all a list of the different changes we've made in that respect. So we're going to go back to that new patient that I had already created. So in our systemic or organ-specific conditions section, for some of our new users, you might not know, but in our old registry, we used to have different categories, and then users were prompted to select checkboxes next to a list of conditions that may have already occurred, and then you have the option to add other conditions that may fall in that category. Well, we've done away with the idea of categories of conditions. So what we do now is we only ask for the condition names, and because we're using a medical coding dictionary, the codes will link us back to the different categories later on when I'm doing data analysis. Now, if you're not completely sure what kind of conditions we want you to put in, we have a bit of an examples presentation that just has a couple of examples of things that we might be interested in. Now, you don't need to limit yourself to the items in this presentation, but it just serves as a general guide. Now, we've also changed the way that we are collecting allergic reactions. While before we would ask for the reaction and then the causative agent, we are now asking you what exactly the patient is allergic to and then what it makes them do. And finally, we've added a new section for malignancies. Previously, malignancies got lumped in with the systemic and organ-specific conditions, but we separated them because there's a couple additional questions that we would like to know about when patients have malignancies. Alrighty. Now again, as I said, there are some sections where we've added additional questions or maybe we have removed some questions, but I'm going to try and focus on sections that are completely new and may have been otherwise overlooked. So in our medications and supplements section, we've added a new section apart from anti-infectives and immunomodulators where you can enter any medications that you feel may be relevant to this patient's primary immunodeficiency care. So for example, if the patient is taking regular probiotics, you can go ahead and note that in this section. In addition, for our anti-infectives, we have separated out prophylactic anti-infectives from other infectives that may be used because there's different questions that we're interested in depending on which type of anti-infective it is. The same goes for our immunomodulators. We've separated out immunomodulators that are being used in non-transplant fashions from immunomodulators that were used for transplant. Speaking of transplant, we've made some big modifications to our transplantation page. For one, users now have the opportunity to put in dates for either hematopoietic stem cell transplant or solid organ transplant. So in that way, there's not just one date box if the patient, say, has received both. You can collect more data that way. In addition, users have the option to enter 2 transplants instead of 1. This goes the same with our gene therapy section. Users have the option to enter 2 gene therapy treatments if that is relevant. And we have expanded some of the questions that we are asking in gene transplant. I also want to highlight that we've added some labs to our core lab test results. Now, these labs do not fall under our required fields, but we have added a section for autoantibodies. And we've also added a section for TCRV beta repertoire analysis. And finally, one of the more poignant changes to the registry is that molecular information, including gene mutations and pattern of inheritance, have been moved over from our disease-specific forms over to the core form. So even if your patient did not have disease-specific questions attached to the phenotype selected, you won't miss adding questions about their gene mutation, DNA changes, protein changes. Now that's kind of across the board, it's going to be asked of everyone. And you have the option to enter 3 different gene mutations if need be. One of the things that we did, and I won't be able to show you all of them because we had chosen a specific disease, but our disease-specific forms, we've kind of changed the format in which we are doing them. We took a look at the forms and we eliminated any redundancies. So we tried not to ask the same questions on the disease-specific forms that we asked on the core forms themselves. And so what we were really left with were pure diagnostic criteria and then any additional questions that were relevant to that patient's disease and specifically not asked on the core form. So we're in the process of continuously adding new disease-specific forms as the disease-specific groups take a look at the forms and are able to formulate new ones. But that should not affect the way that you enter a registry visit. One of the reasons why we chose this software specifically is because it's much easier for us to change around the fields and add new sections without having to seek developer help. So at this point, I'm going to open the floor for some questions. Does anybody have any questions? Is there something that I didn't mention that you would like to see?
Hi, this is Mary from Advocate. If we have a patient that goes to the NIH and we have all their information, can that be added in as a visit, or can you build a separate section for that?
What do you mean in terms of NIH data? Are there specific data points that are?
Yeah, we have some patients that we send to the National Institute of Health, and they do a whole bunch of testing there. But it's not testing that we're doing; it's testing that they're doing, and they do physical and do recommendations and stuff, and then they send them back to us.
Oh, interesting. So
yeah,
reach out to me. If that is a disease-specific type form, we'll have to take a look at the fields and see what is asked differently from these fields versus what's asked differently from our fields. And then we can work into creating a specific form.
Okay. What I can do is I can send you one of my reports that I have, and I'll just de-identify it, and you can see what they look for.
Perfect.
This is Jennifer Puck. I think you could just count this as a visit as long as the data items fit in the fields that are here.
Okay, yeah, I could do it that way, but it's not an actual visit that we run. So it's not our information, it's NIH's information.
That's okay. This is a research registry, so it doesn't have to be specifically from your hospital. The only other issue is that sometimes we have help from NIH and people there are entering patients, and we do have ways to make sure the same patient doesn't get entered twice.
Okay.
Right.
I guess one good question for the developing team is, could a visit be entered from NIH and also another visit entered from the same person from your center?
So the answer to that is yes. It involves communication between the two sites, but we do have the option to transfer patients from one site to another and then back to that original enrolling site if that's their home treatment site. So say, for example, here, if the patient goes to the NIH momentarily but then returns to your site, you can transfer that over to the NIH site. They can, as long as they have a protocol there, they can enter data on that patient, and then I can send it back to your site for follow-up. The transfer from site to site, that's not a hard process. It's a click. I see that Dr. Kabrinsky asked if I could show an example of a disease-specific form. So I just moved this patient diagnosis to ALPS because that is one of the new disease-specific forms that I created with Dr. Leonakis. So, well, Dr. Leonakis created and I put up. Let's classify it. So here's a good example. So family ancestry is not something that we ask on our core form, but that was important to Dr. Leonakis for ALPS patients. So we added that question here. In addition, we asked these diagnostic criteria questions because there were very specific major and minor manifestations related to ALPS or ALPS. And we have, right now, we have disease-specific forms for agamma-globulinemia, CGD, DeGeorge, hyper-IgM, leukocyte adhesion defects, NEMO, SCID and KID, complement deficiency, Wiskott-Aldrich, ALPS and APS1, antibody deficiencies, and HLH. But that doesn't mean that we can't add more of them. We're always looking for, we're currently working on a hyper-IgE form. Again, as I said, one of the best things about this registry is that it's easy for us to add forms. So we're always looking for disease-specific questions that may have not been covered on this core form. One thing that was asked of the last group yesterday that I haven't covered here. Let me go back to I'm sorry, I just went ahead and muted everyone just for a second so that we don't hear that background information. But I'll unmute once I get through this section. So one of the new things that we've done is we've merged the fill program fields with the USIDNET registry. And so when you go to enter a visit, if this is a fill patient, you can go ahead and click this checkbox. And all of a sudden, you've entered the fill program. And so we merge the USIDNET registry fields with any question that may have been asked on the fill registry. So in this way, the data stays with the patient throughout the entire visit. So you will not be entering data for the fill program on a different website anymore. It will still be this website, although there will be a login widget, so to speak. You can still log into the fill program from usidnet.org's fill webpage.
Yeah, hi, this is Walter Donica from Cincinnati Children's. I had a question about how to interpret the new finding question related to an infection.
Absolutely.
So it seems like since it's going to autofill for the second visit from the first visit, it's assuming that the patient may either has previously had, a cellulitis, and we'd like to document that they'd had another, or that they no longer have it. Not really.
Okay, well, that's a good question. So we want to document that either this is a new finding at this visit, like this is something that is still happening. Because while I did push these fields through, I did not push the this is a new finding field through to the next visit. So that yes, no for this is a new finding means that this is a finding at this visit, or in this finding.
So if they've had, recurrent cellulitis that's happened on multiple occasions, it should be documented in multiple visits, and each time you'd specify that it's a new finding for the visit.
For the visit, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Of course. Does anyone have any additional questions? Alrighty. Now, I did hear comments from the last group that for some of the enrolling sites, it is helpful to still have paper forms. Now, in no way are paper forms required to put data into the USIDNET registry, but for multiple different enrolling sites, they told me that it's kind of their way of doing double data checks and record keeping. So I am in the process of finalizing paper forms that reflect the new USIDNET registry. And when that happens, I will put them on the website, and I will notify all of you that they are on the website. I don't know if that's helpful for anyone in this group, but it seemed to be helpful for people in the last group. Alrighty. If there's no other questions, I just want to say that if you start to use this system and then you end up having questions, or there's something that you don't understand, please feel free to send me an email or give me a call. I'm happy to hop on another screen share with anybody if they need to see something done in front of them. I know this is a new system and it's going to be a learning process for all of us, so please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions that you might have. Alrighty. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Sure.
When we have a patient that we're not seeing anymore, what do we do with them?
So a patient that's lost to follow-up, I suppose.
Lost to follow-up, or has moved to like an adult, because we're a pediatric center and they've moved to an adult?
Sure. So, I mean, at that point, the only thing that might happen with that patient is, say that patient has moved over to an adult center, they sign on to a USIDNET registry site there. What might happen is when that site tries to enter that patient, they'll get an error that there's a duplicate participant. At that point, we may reach out to you and ask if it's okay for us to transfer that patient over to their site.
Okay.
But that's as far as we would go with the action that you might need to take. So we might just take that patient off your hands, but we would always ask for permission first.
Okay. And then if it's a patient that never ends up going back in to the registry and he's hanging on ours for years and we haven't put any data in on them?
That's okay. That's okay. We understand.
Just leave them there?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's going to be patients that get lost to follow-up. We understand that.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Marla, I have a question.
For sure.
As for our old data, will that be translated into this new database?
So the data from the last registry is only going to be here in a read-only fashion, because the fields from the old registry may not necessarily fully talk to the fields in the new registry. We're going to have what's called historical data for the old patients. And so you'll be able to see perhaps the last date range in which you put in information, but you're not going to be able to edit any information from this side. Now, that's not to say if you see something here that is glaringly incorrect, please let me know. I can still code it on the back end and fix the data, but for the most part, the information from the old registry will not be editable in the new registry.
Okay, so even the list of inspections, like the page you were on prior to this, pre-populated inspections, that will only be from this database moving forward.
Right, because in the last database, we didn't have it linked to a medical dictionary. So as I found, as I was going through and linking old data, there are some fields that actually don't link up at all. So to avoid confusion, we're just starting anew on this one. Now, that's not to say if you've already filled out information on an old patient visit about, the conditions that led you to diagnosis, as you're doing follow-up visits here, you need only show which conditions are present at the time of that visit.
Right, I don't have to go back and put in all that information.
No.
Okay, good.
It's all there.
That would be a lot.
It's all there.
Yeah.
It's all still there. You just can't edit it from the front end.
Right.
But it's all there.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Alrighty. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.